All right, thank you. Good evening. It's good to see you all. I'm glad to see some regular faces who've come back. I'm also happy to see some new faces who've come, and I've also been intermingling with all of you. I also appreciate the military veteran presence and reservist presence here tonight. One moment for the siren to go by. Yep. And tonight, Veterans Divided. While I'm eager to discuss it, I must warn you, sadly, while many of us served in uniform, proudly so, for our country, not everybody is supportive. Many do support Ukraine. However, I'll be telling you tonight about some who sadly support not only Russia, but Putin. And I want to go ahead and let you know a little bit more about my take on what's going on. Now, for the agenda, I want to go and let you know about my biography, who I am, for those of you who don't know, a personal anecdote, along with summarizing veteran differences. I want to tell you about the biographies of some veterans who have been supportive of Ukraine, while others who have been supportive of Putin, along with some takeaway trends to be aware of. And I want to tell you about the theory of reasoned action, which I'll get to later on, along with the impacts of understanding the veteran divide for those of us who have worn the uniform or support those who do, and questions and answer time to ensure all of you have a chance to ask your questions of me. Now, a little bit more about my biography. Eugene Chu, retired lieutenant colonel from the U.S. Army Reserve. I served as a 90 Alpha logistics officer, and for my overseas assignments, they've included Korea, Iraq, and Poland. I've, and for my education, I'm proud to say that I'm a TCU Horned Frog, having gotten both my bachelor's and master's from there. And I also have 2 graduate level certificates from the U.S. Army's Command and General Staff College. For overseas travel, I mentioned to you my military assignments, but I've also been to mainland China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and also been to Europe for recreation along with my profession. And I've been an advocate for both Ukraine, the flag behind you, and for a free Russia, for the flag to my, which means for the flag to my side. Next slide. Now, this divide came to my attention not because of an online story or from a television report, but from a personal experience that I had a few years ago. This happened in the summer of 2022 when I was still in the U.S. Army Reserve. I was at Fort Hunter Liggett in California doing what reservists call annual training, 2 weeks of productivity along with just practice in order to maintain your proficiencies. And for those of you who've worn the uniform, many of you know that along with your uniforms and your tactical gear, you also carry along a little bit of civilian clothing, either to transit comfortably to or from the airport or just to be relaxed when you're off duty. And I chose at that time to wear this shirt by Vote Vets, a progressive political action committee made up of veterans. As you see from the picture, on the backside they have "We Got Your Six" and the Ukrainian flag to show their stance and support for Ukraine. And while wearing it, I ended up having 2 very memorable but different interactions. I bumped into one lieutenant colonel who was very angry and unhappy that I was wearing that shirt. He came up to me while others were standing around and mentioned how Zelensky was corrupt and that he and Ukraine were just exploiting the West for aid and other things. I attempted to try to be rational and stoic and let him know about politics. However, he didn't want to hear it. I eventually walked away because, in my opinion, my words were going in one ear and out the other. And later on that day, when I was still wearing that shirt, I walked into a tent in order to fill out some paperwork. And I had a different Army reservist come up to me and say thank you because his grandmother was Ukrainian and he, like myself, sympathized with Ukraine and he was happy that I was wearing that shirt. I mentioned that personal story because, to say again, we as veterans have proudly served our country, but not everybody is always on the same side politically. I want to first start out with some biographies of the veterans who have proudly supported Ukraine. They've come from all walks of life, and I want to go ahead and make sure their stories are known. First, we have Jake Bro. He is a U.S. Air Force officer veteran who specialized in nuclear weapons. He was a silo officer, and he was also an English teacher in South Korea uh, as a civilian. And he's a YouTuber right now and has been for several years. But before Ukraine, he was actually doing some unrelated videos. He was talking about the benefits of the US military, along with personal finance topics such as the best credit cards, best programs, and best loyalty programs. However, after Russia launched the unjust invasion of Ukraine, he has since pivoted. Just a few things he talks about. A lot of up-to-date news, a lot of developments on the battlefield. He's also collaborated with other content creators. He's done crossovers with other YouTube channel pundits, and he's also been sponsoring fundraisers for Ukrainian vehicles. He's often reported on the progress of raising funds to get another vehicle for either the Ukrainian military or for first response to help out in besieged cities. And besides him, there are a few others. We also have Quan Nguyen. Yep, some of you may have heard of him. U.S. Marine Corps veteran, is currently in Utah, and he also mentioned one reason why he sympathized with Ukraine. He fled as a child refugee from Vietnam before coming to the U.S. and joining the service. And some of the stories that were mentioned about him from media outlets, including Fox News, was him helping out Ukrainian refugees in Kyiv and in Lviv, and of him doing a lot of supply chain assistance work with humanitarian aid. Again, another hero that was supporting Ukraine. Next, Lance Shavers. I actually personally know him, but just to go over what's on my slide, he's a retired U.S. Navy Chief Petty Officer, and he's got a long history of support, not just recent. Just a little history about him and myself. We actually met in autumn 2025 at a Ukraine Action Summit over near the Capitol, and we're exchanging a few stories when we were visiting congressional offices with our group. And after talking with him over WhatsApp to get ready for this presentation, he reminded me of his other efforts besides right now. In 2016, he was a church missionary who was teaching English in Ukraine. He was actually there in 2022 and 2023 working as a surveillance and reconnaissance drone operator. And right now in 2026, he mentioned to me over the WhatsApp call that he's going through the interview and screening process because he wants to be a foreign candidate for HUR, Ukrainian intelligence. He has gone back multiple times because of his support of Ukraine. Next, making sure I just skip over. Yep, Trevor Reed, Marine Corps veteran, and just to note, he did deploy to Afghanistan like many of his comrades did over the last few decades, but also he was part of presidential service. Many people don't know that at Camp David, it's actually staffed by Navy sailors and U.S. Marines, and he was part of the presidential detail providing support, as you can see in the picture. His connection to Ukraine started in 2019 when he visited Moscow just as a student in school visiting his then girlfriend. Unfortunately, things went awry. To clarify what I mean by arrested for drunken assault, at a house party over in Moscow, he had a bit too much to drink, and his girlfriend decided to call the police to have him just waited out in the drunk tank because he had had so much. The caveat was, while he initially went to the police station peacefully, later on during the shift change, the new people over at the police station decided to dig into his background, and after discovering that he was a military veteran, they ended up later charging him and claiming that he had drunkenly assaulted law enforcement while he was there in the drunk tank. And to clarify what's on the bullet points, when he was in court, the Russian judge actually laughed out loud when the prosecutor tried to describe the charges and the circumstances for his arraignment. And a lot of his supporters here at home were claiming that there was a lot of incomplete evidence, and he also received not just a small little sentence, but 9 years in a labor camp, not just like a small, like a few month sentence in the local jail. And to clarify what happened afterwards, he eventually got released to the US during a prisoner swap in 2022, but after coming home, he didn't stay at home. He eventually decided to fight for Ukraine as a member of their international legion and got wounded over there. And if you see the photo, he published a book called Retribution, which came out earlier this year, which talks about his military experiences, his time in a Russian gulag, and his decision to fight for Ukraine based upon his experiences. Next, we have Cory Naraki. Just so you know, he retired from the U.S. Marines at the rank of Master Sergeant, a high enlisted rank. And just if you see in his military photo, he has multiple medals, along with a lot of the basic medals for participation, such as when you deploy overseas, you'll sometimes get a campaign medal to signify you've been to that regional location. He also has, if you see in the picture, other medals, such as a lot of achievement medals, along with multiple Purple Hearts, the Bronze Star, and the Parachutist Badge, just to describe a lot of his overseas service and valor. Based upon what he heard and saw about Ukraine, he decided to go and fight as a small group leader for an international unit over there. He sadly passed away in 2024 while on a mission, and he only came back home in 2025, over a year later, because the Russian military initially had his body, and they were playing political games, and there was a lot of political back and forth to finally get his body home. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. I was there that day. I actually bumped into several Navy sailors who knew him and respected him, several Marine Corps comrades who also went over to Ukraine to fight alongside with him, and there was a significant Ukrainian military contingent paying their respects, including the Ukrainian ambassador to the US, both at his funeral and at his wake. Now, while I've given you the biographies, I want to go ahead and just summarize some characteristics just so it sticks in your mind. First of all, it's a high level of empathy. They care about Ukraine, and not just the country. They care about the people. They see them as a people in need based upon an unjust invasion, and they want to go and help. And as I mentioned in the biographies, multiple distinguished backgrounds, high levels of awards. Cory Naraki had multiple Purple Hearts. He could have just retired on disability, but still chose to go fight. Lance Shavers, many Navy sailors don't even get out at chief. He got out at chief. And assignments, again, Trevor Reed. Along with him going to Afghanistan, he was also part of the presidential detail at Camp David. Again, a lot of honorable veterans for their backgrounds who went to go and fight for Ukraine. I also need to let you know the opposite now. Yep, along with those who have presented who deserve cheers, there are some who deserve jeers, because these are some U.S. military veterans who sadly support Russia that I found out about, and I think it's also unfortunate but necessary to point them out as well, to ensure that you know of their existence. We have first Dan Castle, born Daniel Castillon. He's a dual citizen. He was born in the US, but however, he also holds Mexican citizenship because of immigrant parents. And to be truthful, he is a US Marine veteran who got an honorable discharge, but however, most of his awards were basically participatory. For example, his highest award was the Marine Combat Action Ribbon, and well, that is somewhat of an award that you have to actually participate in combat for. He doesn't have a Purple Heart or any other achievement medals, which clarify either close quarters or other things like that. And the reason why he went to Russia, as mentioned in the bullet point, he mentioned on his YouTube channel that he actually watched a National Geographic show as a child about rural nature in Siberia, and that's what intrigued him to go. And just to further develop on that, he actually runs a channel on YouTube called Wild Siberia, and along with him putting out a lot of pro-Kremlin content, he's actually done a lot of collaborations with other pro-Kremlin content creators using his military veteran status to promote himself and others. And just to clarify, uh, he is in Russia right now, still lives there. He is married to a Russian woman. They have a son together. And some of his other YouTube video examples, he's mentioned that he has no desire to come back to the U.S. And even though he's a U.S. citizen, he has no desire to get a U.S. citizenship for his wife or his son. He also mentioned on like a live stream chat one time about defending Vladimir Putin based upon traditional values, and he's often posted pro-Kremlin videos such as, oh, look at this clean life in Siberia, or oh, look at this clean modern subway in Moscow. Again, one who does not support Ukraine and supports Putin, and he's not the only one. We also have Captain Loftus, U.S. Army veteran, and as the bullet point mentions, we don't know his military history. When I looked up the news reports, it just said that he was a veteran. He's in his 50s. I don't think he deployed, but however, I'm not going to 100% quote and verify it because, again, I don't have the official records. But however, what is known, he participated in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And unlike a few others who have been sorry and who have said, I was tricked, I was wrong, he has been unremorseful. And to clarify the bullet points, he sent over $1,000 on the Telegram app to a contact for the Russian military to buy equipment. And to clarify what I mean by he got stopped during overseas travel to join the Russian military, he initially tried to go to Russia by plane hopping from US to Turkey to Georgia, then to Russia. However, when he was in Turkey, his passport got flagged, and the Turkish authorities said, we're not letting you go any further, and they pressured him to go back home. Afterwards, he got charged. To clarify, it wasn't for trying to support Russia per se, but rather, along with January 6th, which he was on probation for, he also had a separate driving under intoxication charge that he was on probation for, and he got a 6-month prison sentence in December 2024 because, again, probation for 2 separate charges, but still got into trouble. Yep. And then we also have Russell Bentley. He, some of you may have heard of him. He went by the nicknames Comrade Texas and the Donbass Cowboy. Just to recap about his background, he served in the U.S. Army during the 1980s after belatedly earning a GED in his 20s. And after his short military service, he held a bunch of just low-paying menial jobs, and he unsuccessfully tried to run for the U.S. Senate and got less than 2% of the vote. After the string of failed jobs and the failed political campaign, he ended up turning to a life of crime. In the 1990s, he got convicted for marijuana trafficking, felony level, just to clarify, not for possession or like just small level, state level dealing. Again, it was felony level. And he got sent to maximum security prison because he initially went to a minimum security camp, which is the term for a minimum security prison in the US. He chose to escape, was a fugitive for a significant amount of time, and after getting caught, spent the rest of his sentence in maximum security. He proceeded on a downward spiral. In the 2010s, he continued to get more and more anti-Western. As mentioned on the slide, he proceeded to vandalize and deface a military recruiting sign with F NATO. And in 2014, after Russia initially seized Crimea, he went to Crimea and joined a militia. To clarify, it was not the Russian military. It was Donetsk People's Army. It was a separatist militia sponsored by the Kremlin. And he continued to get more Russified until the very end. He married a local woman, converted to the Russian Orthodox Church, and became a Russian citizen in 2021. But as mentioned on the slide, he died in 2024. Russian soldiers lynched him after they thought he was a spy. A sad end, but something he brought on himself. Next, we have John David McIntyre. And to clarify, he briefly served for 2 years as infantry in the U.S. Army. From the news reports, he did not complete his time in service. He was discharged early, and he did not deploy overseas. And the follow-up, after his brief time in the military and getting kicked out, he joined the Ukrainian International Legion, and as mentioned on the slide, he later deserted for Russia. Based upon a lot of the stories that I read about him online, he was actually not an ideal international candidate. There were a lot of stories where he was behaving erratically. They actually took away his weapon one time because they were worried about him hurting himself. And he was making a lot of contradictory, outlandish statements saying, I'm an anti-fascist, I'm a communist, I'm thinking about converting to Islam and pursuing jihad. Again, a lot of contradictory statements from erratic behavior. But after his desertion, he appeared on RT, Russian state media, and he claimed during that report that, oh, the Ukrainian military is corrupt, and oh, I deliberately deserted from the military because I was just there to spy on them, and I tried to take maps, notes, and photos to help the Russians. There hasn't been any recent media coverage of him, but however, again, he was in the news, and again, not our best and brightest. And last but not least, Wilmer Playomota. To clarify, he was former Air Force National Guard. Specifically, he was a security forces member, which is Air Force Police, and he was also a city councilor over in Massachusetts. Now, was is the terms because for criminal background. To clarify what I mean by the charges of forgery, obstruction, and child porn, if any of you remember an old American TV show called To Catch a Predator, he ended up participating in something similar to what those people do on that show. He got indicted for asking an underage 17-year-old girl to send him a nude photo of her while supposedly lying, trying to meet her, and after he got caught, he allegedly tried to destroy the evidence. However, I will say that after that, to clarify on the consequences, things happened. For those of you who have been in the military or still in as reservists, it takes time in order to either do criminal proceedings or to kick someone out. But however, they did revoke his security clearance to show that he was no longer trustworthy before starting the discharge paperwork. The city council that he was part of tried to expel him, but got told, we have to wait until criminal conviction in civilian court. But unfortunately, that never happened because, as mentioned on this bullet point, he fled to Russia before his first appearance in court to make his plea. Yep. He made multiple propaganda appearances in 2024. You see this bottom picture? That was him shaking hands and signing his enlistment contract for the Russian military. And there were some alleged pictures of him, or actually videos of him in occupied Ukraine, specifically in Avdiivka. His face was blurred, but however, he mentioned his call sign was Boston, and a lot of people who knew him over in Boston, after seeing that, were 90% sure it was him based upon voice, based upon height and other characteristics. To say again, not just supporting Putin, but fighting for him. Yep. And now I also want to make sure I summarize some characteristics so it sticks in your mind as takeaways. Understanding its support for Russia, and it's not just minor sympathies, it's actual opposition to modern Western society, because while Western society has changed over the decades, we are still governed by laws, we're still governed by social norms, and a lot of our values and laws, for example, don't do certain drugs or are off limits. Sex should be at a certain age, and other things. They didn't want to abide by those. And also, as mentioned, the military background, many of them got kicked out early or left at a lower rank compared to Chief Shavers or to Master Sergeant and Rocky. They didn't serve a long period with distinction. Some of them left either under basic circumstances or under bad circumstances. And now I want to go over the theory of reasoned action. Let me explain it to you. I came across this theory uh, at an unrelated presentation when I was in the audience. A professor at George Washington University was talking about semantics, how the wording contributes towards why certain people are influenced or want to commit acts of terrorism. It's based on a 1970s social psychology theory. Going backwards, it claims that behavior is rooted in your intent. You're wanting or are urged to do something, and your wants and urged are based on either attitude and or social norms. For attitude, it's individual. It's what's inside of you. It's what are you internally thinking and feeling uh, out of either want or need. And social norms, it's group-based. Who are the people that you are interacting with? What kind of media are you listening to, whether it be like radio, TV, papers, or books or anything else? Again, those shape your intent and your behavior. Now, a basic comparison, I'm not a psychiatrist, but from a lay perspective, understanding something from attitude. From the attitude from the people that I've known who supported Ukraine, it's that of humility. Understanding the word humility referring to being humble, not humiliation. For them, they believe that Russia invaded as an unjust aggressor. They sympathize with the Ukrainians. They want to help. And for norms, they're listening primarily to regular media and a lot of transparency from others, such as Ukrainian advocates or even Ukrainian military veterans who sometimes visit, that Ukraine is a democratic nation that's trying to fight for survival. And they have a lot of affinity for different groups because there are a lot of traditional conservative, modern, and progressive political groups that support Ukraine, and they feel that way out of kinship. And for Russia, for me, I think it's more like an attitude of narcissism. Their attitude is might makes right. Their belief has been like that, then that others are unjustly provoking Russia to invade. They're using the excuse of, oh, NATO went east, or oh, Ukraine didn't fulfill all the Budapest memorandum, or all these other things. And they also have feelings of malice, like I mentioned, for that interaction that I had in 2022 as a reservist. That lieutenant colonel who came up to me, it was not a calm, stoic manner. He was angry and denigrating when he came up to me. Uh, and also, for alternative media, keeping in mind that we've had alternate pundits such as Tucker Carlson, Tim Pool. Some of them got fired from Fox News for multiple issues, or including support for Russia, and they're propagating that, oh, Ukraine is corrupt or manipulating the West. And there's also a lot of bitterness because for a lot of progressive groups, a lot of moderate groups, or traditional conservative groups, they actually have more sympathy for Russia because Russia, they criminalized LGBT behavior. They have an extremely strict immigration policy, and racism is sadly more tolerated over there compared to the West. And they are also very big into whatever church they are in, because the Russian Orthodox Church has been under a lot of Kremlin control and been putting out propaganda, especially since the invasion of Ukraine. Now, after all this, coming back home, I think it's important to understand the impacts and how it affects us, because some of us are intellectuals, some of us are supporters, some of us have worn the uniform or still wear the uniform in the service, understanding its divide. It's important to understand domestically here at home, the military still has an elite reputation. People still thank us for our service, for those who served, because it requires a volunteer decision. It also requires a sacrifice because you're giving up your freedom. You can't say certain things. You have to follow regulations. Whether you like it or not, you have to go to drill or deploy 99% of the time based upon the rules. And again, elite status because we're such a small number today. Less than 2% of the American population is currently in the service, whether it's on active duty in the reserves or the National Guard. Less than 10% previously served, whether it be a few terms as a veteran or for decades as a retiree. And also, it's also important, Russia and Ukraine have use for the American veteran because it's outside perspective. Some of them only hear about the media from what they can see. We're providing a firsthand account, whether we're talking with them or going to Ukraine to help them, or sadly, in the other side, for the Russians who are getting the veteran perspective. It's also a morale boost for both sides. They're able to say, hey, we have foreigners who are willing to help us. They use it's bolstering them to say they're on our side, and also reputational leverage. The fact that you have others that are willing to fight for you means a lot emotionally as well as informationally. I went through a little fast, but I want to go ahead and close out by mentioning some important things. It's understanding that sadly there is a divide. I have been supportive of Ukraine. I have been supportive of a free Russia. Many others are supportive of Ukraine and a free Russia, but that does not extend to all veterans. And it's also important to know that veterans are diverse besides service. We all may wear a similar uniform, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we have the exact same ideologies. Your outside background also plays a role. For example, gender plays a role. Your where you grew up plays a role. What rank you are, what your job is in the service, whether you have a family or other events. Those also shape a lot of your perspectives, and also understanding relationship difficulties. Many people, especially here in the US, do understand and acknowledge there is sometimes a civil military divide between those who've never served and those who've worn the uniform. That's understandable. But however, it extends also internally to the veterans community. Some veterans still don't have good relationship with other veterans because generation gap, ideology, politics, or other things that I've been welcomed most of the time by fellow veterans. But however, I've had a few veterans treat me quite coldly based upon, again, different generation, different beliefs, or other attitudes. And I also ask, and I also mentioned here, be prepared to adapt and change your style. Most veterans have treated me warmly as a fellow comrade. However, I've learned the hard way that sometimes you have to. They're not going to treat you the same way. Be careful. And for this last bullet point, that interaction from 2022 regarding both the anti-Ukraine reservists and the pro-Ukraine reservists, I acknowledge I handled it wrong because I was stoic. I tried to persuade him using factual logic and reason. In certain situations, you may not be able to cut through the emotional bias. They're going to be dead set in their beliefs. But however, if I could have done it all over again, for the sake of wisdom, I should have tried to read him a little more closely after hearing his initial anger and denigration towards me. And also, for sake of charisma, instead of trying to logically persuade him about being incorrect, I should have gotten into a space before leaving to say, if you and your unit have to deploy over to Europe, are you truly going to be loyal to us because we're supposed to be allies of Ukraine? Right now, to say again, many of us who've worn the uniform are very supportive. Many of you who support the veterans, thank you for doing so. However, I also say that for those of you who do support the veterans, be careful because again, many of us do, but however, be wary because I don't want you to make the same mistake that I made, and I don't want others to deal with what I made. Because again, two different sides are sadly involved in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, not only with participation, but also with information and propagation. And now I'm going to open up the floor for questions. I do want to say this before answering questions. Please tell me your name and your background because you know about me. I want to know about you. I ask you please to keep the questions related to the presentation, help you to make sure that the information is going to stay on tangent. And also, please don't interrupt someone else's turn or exceed time. I've been in the audience before and hadn't happened to me once. Nobody else has done it to me. But however, again, for politeness' sake, I want to make sure everybody gets a turn. And for what I saw so far, I have one and then two. Okay.
Yeah. Great. Well, it's like one of those history does not repeat but rhyme moments. But hopefully, at least most of you are familiar with this classic, this essay. If you haven't read it yet, do read it. I think it's actually free on Harper's now because it was written back in August 1941. It's really called "Who Goes Nazi" by Dorothy Thompson. And what you described reflects that it almost maps that very clearly, as in the characteristics of those, as in she characterized, while in Germany, in the early years of the Nazi regime, before she got kicked out as a correspondent from Berlin.
Mm-hmm.
And she was also famous for disrupting the Nazi rally in Madison Square Garden in New York. And she literally said, just characterize, it's almost mapping to how you characterize those who support Ukraine versus supporting Russia, as in the psychological, the personality determinants of, well, who's going to go Nazi and who's never going to go Nazi. So from you, it's just looking at just in parallels in history of what else do you see there, as in these previous moments. And because here in the States, we've seen something similar here, let's say generations ago, but it's been a very similar situation here around which side are people going to align with and such. So what do you think, as basically as all of us, hopefully our students of history, what might we actually learn from those prior precedents?
Okay. To clarify, to make sure I heard you correctly, you're asking about what can we learn from those prior precedents? I would say it's important to know about other when it comes down to both recruiting before going into service and also out of service, understanding history of the individual and also what they do afterwards. Because as I mentioned on the slide, while it's not a guarantee, Russell Bentley, he was not the brightest because he got his GED late in life, and also uh, due to failures of finding a civilian job, he got disgusted with the West. I would say that for prior presidents, understanding about where are they coming from, but also are they able to adapt to civilian life? There have been multiple cases of successful veterans. There have been some cases of those who've gone on to do great things, but there have been some cases of those who have become homeless. There have been a few cases of those who committed acts of misconduct while in. It's important to understand. I'd say peeling one layer back to say, okay, you're from this area, or oh, you may come from this rich or poor background, or you come from this educated or uneducated, or these other backgrounds. What does that contribute? What's the connection, and how are you? And should we worry about you behaving from a certain way? I want to make sure that you get a chance to have your question, but just to answer it, it's also being able to say that. And while I'm not saying you should spy on somebody, but however, sadly, after the fact, you can probably understand after the fact why somebody might have been more susceptible versus another. I think you can pass it. It's like it's without.
Uh, Hi, my name is Sonia, and I have a master's in conflict management and foreign policy, specializing in Balkans, Eastern Europe.
Yes.
I was curious, you mentioned something about there being a gender divide in supporting Ukraine. I do remember reading, I think it was a study a while back. I can't give you super specific details, but it had to do with intelligence gathering in the military and how female military members were ultimately better at this because of, I think it came down to like a heightened empathy compass that made them just better for gathering intelligence because both men and women were more comfortable talking to them. I was just wondering if that played any part in there maybe being a gender divide in supporting Ukraine as well?
Okay, to answer your question about the gender divide, there probably are female veterans who are supporting Ukraine. However, when I was doing my internet searches trying to pull up biographies, I didn't see any of them. If I end up giving like an updated version of this, I will ensure that they are included. Like I said, there are there have been some female veterans and other female volunteers from other countries, just not the U.S., that I came across. I don't know about intelligence gathering too much. I do know that Ukraine did rely on female intelligence operators to, let's say, act as honeypot traps, like on dating apps and other things for Russian soldiers. But to my knowledge, I think that was more of an intelligence agency operation rather than military. And for the Russian military, unlike the Ukrainian military or Western militaries, women do still serve in the Russian military, but it's still like pre-1970s, such as they, instead of being integrated, they still have a separate women's corps, to my knowledge. And I think they've only recently started having women serve in the Russian military attacking Ukraine. So, from what I've heard, the ones who do serve are not volunteers, but rather female convicts, because if any of you remember, Russia started recruiting a lot of hardcore convicts, again, not basic level crime, but hardcore crimes such as murder, sexual crime, things like that. And a lot of the women who fight for the Russian military, either as uniformed service members or as contractors, they, I think, are coerced based upon, hey, stay in jail and we're going to turn off the heat and cut off your food, or fight on the front lines. Again, for women performing intelligence duties, they definitely do. I think that's more intelligence agency rather than military. And again, if I end up doing a refresh of this presentation and I find any other women service members who are serving, specifically, but this was tonight, America service members, but if I do an international one, I do know, I think, like a Norwegian or a Finnish or a few Finns or a few others from the Baltic countries of women who are serving for Ukraine.
Do you have any I'm sorry, I'm Ralph Winnie Jr. with the America Eurasia Center.
Yes.
Do you have statistics on veterans that have chosen to fight for Ukraine versus veterans that have chosen to fight for Russia? Is that allowed under the U.S. law and the Constitution, as far as you know? I think about the Spanish Civil War and how you had people supporting the loyalist cause through money and also through personal involvement versus the people that supported Franco, which were the communists, and again, money and people going to fight. Do you see that sort of parallel in this case as well?
Okay, to answer your question, for data, I have zero data, because that data would probably be with the Ukrainian and Russian militaries, and I have no access to that whatsoever. Okay. Tonight, like I said, it came from, like I said, a lot of anecdotal, open source intelligence, along with, again, personal knowledge. And as for motivations to fight, I would say that while money partially is involved, I would say, and this may come if I ever come back here and redo one for international veterans, not just U.S. I would say that extremely poor countries, but also that are Russian aligned, are more likely to fight for money, because, for example, from what I've read in anecdotal accounts, Africans, a few Chinese, South Asians, and a few others fight for Russia primarily because of poverty. There are Colombians who've been fighting for Ukraine, and while they do get paid relatively well because Colombia is so poor, but however, since it is more of a Catholic country, they feel more sympathy for Ukraine, and from the stories that I've read, they actually feel more sympathy because I think a few members of the International Legion who were from Colombia, they initially did their term, but they chose to extend because they had sympathy for the people that they were fighting for. But again, to recap on your question, no idea about data. Money plays a partial role, but ideology and political affiliation also plays a role.
A lot of Cubans fight for Russia
Yes,
because of poverty.
yes. Poverty.
Average salary is like $20 a month.
Yeah.
Yes.
And North Koreans, yeah.
North Korea.
Well, they didn't have a choice.
Yes. Yep. The caveat, and I want to make sure someone else gets a chance to ask. North Koreans, I did my previous presentation on them. They are forced to fight because Kim Jong-un officially deployed them and said, you will fight.
Yeah.
And for the Cubans, again, poverty plays one role, but also affiliation because Cuba and Russia, Cold War, and up until I think a few decades ago, Russia still had an overseas base over in Cuba, if memory serves. Yep. And someone else?
Okay.
Okay, last question.
I remember in the beginning of the war that there were so many articles about how the Russian soldiers in Ukraine were so hesitant to fight. That really famous interaction between the woman who told the Russian soldier to put the sunflower seeds
Yes.
in her pocket and such. I was wondering if there's any more data that you're aware of if this attitude of sympathy still exists, because I feel like we don't hear about it so much.
That one I think is, I hate to say that, that goes a little off topic. My topic was more
Sorry.
about like the American military experience. And but just to answer your question quickly, it was just one of the lies that the Russian soldiers got told was Zelensky is a corrupt dictator. You're being seen as liberators. They got the cold water figuratively splashed in their faces by saying, no, you're seen as an invader. You are attacking us. So I'm afraid I don't have any more data. Like I said, for that, it's just anecdotal. And then you said we're okay.
Hi. Oh, my name is Juanita Kennedy. I was in the Air Force getting out in '96.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if any thoughts on like what tactics or methods that are probably used by all military and maybe all intelligence agencies that contribute to worse conflict between nations.
Okay,
So it's more about yeah, maybe the tactics and methodology that they're all using, and then once one uses it, the other one has to match it or be more extreme, and then the way that contributes, and then this, even the presentation tonight is like, well, which side do you choose instead of like which issues are maybe common to both of them that are preventing
okay.
agreements or preventing a different outcome than one that's occurring.
Okay. I would say that just to answer your question, even though I think like it goes into my last slide in terms of what's contributing. I think the Americans who contribute to both the Russian and Ukrainian side, one was equipment and technical knowledge because in the since Ukraine was previously part of the Soviet Union, and even with a lot of advisory efforts and slowly getting in Western equipment, some of them still were used to the old Soviet-style equipment, such as AK-47s or RPGs versus M4s or javelins. So for the American side, they were providing a lot of technical knowledge of that. Language knowledge, because while while the International Legion comes from multiple countries, some of those countries still speak English, and sometimes if you they've been able to try to teach the Ukrainians English or just act as interpreters in some cases. And I would say that also it's absorption because Lance, from what he was telling me over the WhatsApp call, he was initially uh, teaching them a little bit about English in the beginning as one example, but however, after his time over there, he was learning about tactical use of drones, which is actually something that he is learning because Western militaries, such as the US specifically, while we have drones, those are more like large drones used at like the middle operational level, like at a lieutenant colonel that would control or distribute downward. Ukraine is currently using tactical drones. They have junior officers giving orders to junior soldiers and having non-commissioned officers supervise them. So I would say it's a mix of America's been providing some technical knowledge for both sides. They've been providing some English language training for both sides, but also the Americans who had fought for both sides are now learning about recent tactics and specifically using drones at the junior tactical level, not just at the high level.
What I mentioned is more in the area of maturity, emotional development, decision making, and sort of kind of the more personal development side.
Okay.
Not I know I didn't specify technical tactics.
Okay.
More like the way a person develops his childhood, the things that are normal in terms of maybe their tolerance for violence, maybe their sensitivity, those sorts of things, and the way that conditioning is. Or maybe some scenarios where they're forced to choose between two terrible choices, and then leave it, in order to progress up chains of commands, these decisions get more and more drastic, and that creates, maybe even symptoms of terrorism like in the country, right? In order for someone to demonstrate they have control over the state, you may have actors creating a problem to sort of provide a solution.
Okay. For the ethics part, I could just answer from the surface level that I think it's a matter of just it's more of a perpetuation. It's more of they're both already in the fight. In terms of laws of war, I have no idea whether America's trying to teach a more humane, or respectful version versus what they're contributing for the Russians. But that's a caveat on what you're saying for emotions. I will say this: one American development that you reminded me of, increased use. Okay, yeah. Okay, increased use of in delegation of non-commissioned officers and petty officers. Eastern armies, especially the Soviet military, they're non-commissioned officers, they're sergeants. They were just seen as more senior privates. They acted more like bullies. They didn't really get any self-development training. U.S. military, and on the enlisted side, non-commissioned officers enlisted have to go through additional training at each rank in order to develop. And for the Western side, I think what they're also trying to teach is, instead of like the lieutenant or the officer controlling everything, they're teaching now to have, like I said, non-commissioned officers act as familial figures, such as acting as a father or as a mother or as a middle manager, in order to say, hey, listen and respect them. They are experienced and mature in giving you orders, versus the Russian side, where the non-commissioned officer is an older private who's just going to try to beat you and extort you for your pay because you're lower in rank.
More questions.
Okay, then.
I have a question that's just like
Yes.
similar.
Yes.
Kind of goes off of it. So what I don't understand
Yes.
about this war is that the Donbass is Ukraine. It's Ukrainian land. It's
Yes.
recognized on the maps of Ukraine. So what in the world got into people's brains to where both on the Russian and the Ukrainians, well, actually more on the Russian side, that made it okay for the Russians to come invade Ukrainian land? And how do we prevent that? How do we develop a maturity or an agreement on international law that if this land is part of a certain country, it is not okay to come take it by force?
Okay.
Because it seems like even in the United States, the supposedly mature democratic country, we have backslid so far, it's not even funny. We have a giant portion of our military who's siding with this logic of might is right, which you mentioned at the very beginning of your talk. So this isn't just a Russian phenomenon. This
Okay.
is something that's happening worldwide. And how does the military as a source of, military is a source of progress, it's a source of innovation, technology, health innovation even comes from the military. How does the military go back and fix this?
Okay, to answer to a two-part question. One, for the Donbass, I am a Ukraine supporter. I am a supporter of a free Russia. However, when I was looking at some of the demographics when Ukraine voted for independence, Crimea and Donbass did vote in favor of independence, but I think the number, just vaguely off of memory, was a lot smaller, more like 60-ish% versus 80 to 90% over in central and in western Ukraine. And also, Russian propaganda was reaching out to a lot of Russian speakers, and because of mixed families, there might have been like off topic. One famous Playboy model, Irina Voronina, she actually has a Ukrainian father and a Russian mother, and also again they still spoke Russian over there. They've been susceptible to a lot of propaganda because there have been a lot of Russian speakers over in the Baltic countries, such as I know that in Estonia they got a large Russian-speaking population. Language is powerful. It's more if they listen to some of the broadcasts, maybe the first broadcast doesn't get through, but if it gets persistent, that gets through. And as for the military, I think the issue is being able to actually say that, define something that's wrong, and as I mentioned on my final slide, wisdom and charisma. In the military, you don't have to sit through a lot of annual briefs, such as go to a PowerPoint or an online video to say, hey, if someone is acting suspicious, you need to report this over to military police or to counterintelligence or so forth. The caveat is sometimes it goes in one ear and out the other, or sometimes you have some high level people who are spouting those things because, again, my personal experience when I was a reservist, that was a fellow lieutenant colonel that was saying those anti-Ukraine things to me, not a junior officer, not a junior NCO or junior enlisted. It's also, I think, just for the military to fix it, understanding it's not just what you say, it's also emotionally saying it, and again, charismatically saying it. And your turn.
My name is Irina. I'm from public sector. We call them human rights advocacy and human rights.
Yes.
So my question is, why do you pay equal attention to the supporters of Ukraine and supporters of Russia among American militaries? Because, like, from your presentation, it looks like it's around to be equal. As in real Russian supporters, it's not numerous cases, just a few cases.
Yes.
Generally in the world.
Yes.
And if we're talking about Ukrainian supporters, it's thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people in the world.
Yes.
I mean,
Well,
why you decided to pay equal attention to this?
Thank you. You have a legitimate complaint. There is far more sympathy numerically for Ukraine. I was trying to address equal sides or equal numbers, to say that while the numbers are for Ukraine, it's not just there are still numerous cases, and when I mentioned my personal anecdote, it's not just always like the junior side. There are also, as sad as I'm going to say it, a small number of middle or higher ranking people who do it, and there are also some people who I think, how shall I say it? They don't necessarily want to come out and say that they sympathize with Putin because they don't want to come across the wrong way, but they secretly harbor that inside of them. Ukraine has the majority of support in the world. I support Ukraine. You've seen my pictures. I've been here previous times. The caveat is the ones who sadly and wrongfully support Russia. They still exist, and I also want to make sure that you're also being careful, because it's one thing. It's not to say that they're equal in numbers. I'm also trying to say be cautious, because again, you think or feel that someone's going to be that way. But as I mentioned, I wore that pro-Ukraine shirt. I learned quickly that not everybody respected me for wearing it. Again, I'm doing it not out of trying to give equal time to a wrong side. I'm trying to emphasize being cautious.
And also, Confucius said that, just to comment, that morality flows from top down. And, you've seen what morality flows down. So it's difficult to expect anything else.
Our entire administration is from Russia. What do you expect?
Yes.
Did you have a question as well? Oh, sure. I guess my question is, if the entire administration is pro-Russian, now you, Lee?
I think you just wanted to mention you didn't have a question.
No, I just
Okay.
made the comment.
Okay.
That
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right.
It's kind of
Okay.
obvious,
I understand.
self-evident, but still needs to be said.
Relevant, yeah.
I understand.
For sure.
Yep. And I'm going to mention a little one off-topic thing. U.S. federal government for support for Ukraine has sadly decreased, as you mentioned. I would say, for personal opinion, two things. One, there's still state and local government support. Keep that in mind. And two, give to charities. There's still private organizations who are helping Ukraine. And I've just been told that we're out of time. Thank you all for coming tonight.